In the 15th century, a small kingdom of about 1 million inhabitants began the era of maritime exploration that would transform the world. This era is also known as the Age of Discovery. Portugal turned to the boundless Atlantic Ocean as its only outlet to the wider world. As early as 1341, Portuguese sailors had made their first forays into the tempting waters beyond their shores, exploring the Canary Islands off the northwest coast of Africa. Rival Spain would later end up conquering the Canaries, but the Portuguese had already gained the global advantage when it came to shipbuilding, navigation, and cartography. Shortly after the early 15th century, Portugal, under ambitious King João I, turned its attention to Morocco, the Muslim stronghold seen as the gateway to gold, spices, and other untold riches in Africa and beyond. My name is Francisca, and welcome to the Myths and Curiosities channel. Already leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell so you don't miss any notifications. In the 14th century, the Knights Templar were persecuted across Europe. Their lands and riches were confiscated and many Templars sentenced to death, including the last Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, who was tortured and burned to death in 1314. Dinis took in many Templar refugees in Portugal and, together with his wealth, brought great nautical, cartographic, and astronomical knowledge with them. These immigrants were included in the new Order of Christ of Dinis. This reconfigured religious order, inspired by the Templars, would be the main driving force behind the desire to carve out a new empire. Indeed, the order could be seen represented by the Templar cross on the sails of Portuguese caravels. Both D. Henrique the Navigator and D. Manuel I, key figures in Portugal's overseas expansion, were Grand Masters of the Order of Christ. The first steps in Portugal's Age of Discovery was the capture of Ceuta in North Africa by King João I in 1415. In 1415, a Portuguese fleet crossed the Strait of Gibraltar and captured the heavily fortified Moroccan port of Ceuta, heralding Portugal's arrival on the world stage. In the following decades, João's son, Infante D. Henrique the Navigator, financed numerous expeditions along the west coast of Africa with the aim of spreading Christianity and enriching Portugal with the profits of gold, spices, and slaves. Portugal was largely responsible for the introduction of the slave trade in the Americas through colonies on hitherto uninhabited islands in Atlantic Africa that served as collection points for captives and goods. When Henrique died in 1460, Portuguese sailors and settlers arrived in present-day Sierra Leone and formed active colonies on the islands of Porto Santo, Madeira, and the Azores. The momentum behind Portuguese maritime exploration waned somewhat after Henry's death, but would regain strength under the rule of his great-nephew, King John II. In 1487, on a mission to find a sea route from Portugal to India, Bartolomeu Dias led the first successful sea voyage to the southern tip of Africa, rounding the Cape of Good Hope and sailing for a few days before returning. At the beginning of the 16th century, the annual armadas of India were leaving Lisbon on the long journey to India. On one of these trips, Pedro Álvares Cabral, 1467 to 1620, would discover what Brazil is today in 1500. Back in Lisbon in late 1488, Genoese navigator Christopher Columbus was among those present as Dias recounted stories of his historic voyage with John's court. Columbus, who had received his training in navigation in Lisbon and had been married to a Portuguese woman, tried to interest John in his own proposal to find the resource-rich Indies by sailing west. But the Portuguese king rejected this idea, leaving Columbus to seek support from the rival monarchs John, Isabella, and Ferdinand of Spain. In 1494, a year after Columbus made his triumphant return to Europe after arriving in what are now the Bahamas, Cuba, Haiti, and the Dominican Republic, negotiators from Portugal and Spain met in a small Spanish town to share control of what they called the New World. After Christopher Columbus' first voyage to the Americas in 1492 from Palos de la Frontera near Huelva, Pope Alexander VI, a member of the infamous Borgia family, hoped to settle any disputes over new territories between Castile and Portugal. His initial papal bulls on the matter would lead to the Treaty of Tordesillas, negotiated by King João I of Portugal and King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Castile, which divided the newly discovered lands outside Europe between the two Catholic powers. In this treaty, the Portuguese received lands outside Europe east of a line that ran 370 leagues west of Cape Verde, and the islands reached by Columbus on his first voyage, namely Cuba and Hispaniola. Vasco da Gama arrives in India. In 1497, Vasco da Gama led first ships in about 170 crew along the route that Diaz had followed, this time veering even more sharply into the South Atlantic to catch the favorable currents needed to pass the Cape of Good Hope. Plagued by starvation, scurvy, and other dangers of travel, they sailed along the east coast of Africa, stopping in Mozambique and other ports in present-day Kenya. With the help of a local navigator, da Gama and his ships crossed the Indian Ocean, reaching Calicut, India, in May 1498. Da Gama's success opened the first sea route from Europe to India, paving the way for a new era of global trade and colonialism. In later expeditions, da Gama and others established a Portuguese network of trading posts and fortresses in East Africa and India, using brutal force against local Muslim and Hindu populations at their convenience. The port of Lisbon was soon teeming with ships carrying precious spices like cinnamon, ginger, black pepper, and saffron, as well as other precious goods. Afonso de Albuquerque, 1453–1515, crosses the age of discovery like a colossus. Albuquerque was instrumental in King Manuel I's grand scheme to secure spice routes to India, fight and defeat Islam, as well as seek out new territories. Nicknamed the Terrible, Albuquerque, during his colorful career in the East, set out to establish an ancient Portuguese fort on the coast of India near Kochi in Kerala, capture and secure Goa, which would remain in Portuguese hands until 1961, attack Hormuz in Persian Gulf, Socotra in the Arabian Sea, and also take Malacca on the southwest coast of present-day Malaysia. Afonso Albuquerque was a brilliant strategist and was prepared to use extreme violence and cruelty to achieve his goals. He succeeded Francisco de Almeida in 1509 to become the second Portuguese governor of the Estado de India. Albuquerque can be seen as one of the first empire builders, and his voyages and those of other Portuguese sea captains herald our era of globalization. His actions in Goa and Malacca were to guarantee the Portuguese presence in Asia. Later, Portuguese explorers would move from India to various spice islands in Southeast Asia, where Portuguese trading bases and factories were established. Duarte Fernandes became the first European to visit Siam, Thailand, in 1511, and Antonio de Abreu, 1480–1514, explored Timor the following year. The coast of China was reached in 1513 by Jorge Alvarez, re-establishing the commercial links between Europe and China, severed since the time of Marco Polo. Around 1542, Fernão Mendes Pinto, Cristóvão Baralho, and Diogo Zaimoto are among the first Europeans to arrive in Japan, landing on the island of Tanegashima in Kyushu. In 1557, Macau is given to Portugal by the Chinese emperor as a reward for fighting pirates in the South China Sea. In the mid-16th century, Portugal has commercial bases in India, Goa, China, Macau, Sri Lanka, Gal, Indonesia, Japan, Nagasaki, and Malaysia, Malacca. A few years later, the sailor and navigator Ferdinand Magellan, anglicized as Magalhães, proposed a route westward to the Spice Islands at the tip of South America. After King Manuel I of Portugal rejected him, Magellan, like Columbus before him, turned to Spain. Magellan died in the Philippines, but one of his ships returned to Spain in 1522, completing the historic effort to circumnavigate the globe. One of the great global impacts of the Age of Discovery is the so-called Columbian Exchange, a transfer of of culture, flora and fauna, tobacco, potato, tomato, etc., ideas, people, mainly black African slaves to the Americas, and technology between the New World of the Americas and the Old World of Africa, Asia, and Europe in the 15th and 16th centuries. The beginning of Portugal's decline as a world power was the ill-fated adventure of King Sebastião I, who led the Portuguese army from the port of Lagos to defeat in Morocco at the Battle of Alcazar in 1578. This disaster resulted in the death of Sebastião and the flower of the nobility, Portuguese, and the conquest of Portugal for a time by Spain. Competition from other maritime powers, notably England and Holland, would also weaken Portugal's dominance in global trade. The Portuguese were expelled from Japan in the early 17th century and their place taken by the Dutch, who also took earlier Portuguese possessions in Sri Lanka and Indonesia in the 1640s. I hope you enjoyed knowing how Portugal became a great power. Tell me in the comments if you liked it. Enjoy now, leave your like, share this video, and subscribe to the channel to help bring good content daily. See you in the next video.